We're really excited to start off this morning really going into some issues around perception and some questions that I think we've seen out in the public, but I think has been really done well in researching through Strata and especially through the Gallup organization. I'm really excited to start off with our first speaker, who is actually going to be Carol D'Amico, who is the Executive Vice President for Mission Advancement and Philanthropy for Strata Foundation. She plays a key role in developing the state-based philanthropic initiatives involving higher ed, business, and the workforce sectors across the country. And she has a vast experience where we've worked with her over many years in education, ranging from being Chancellor of Ivy Tech Community College to Assistant Secretary for the U.S. Department of Education. Please join me in welcoming Carol.
Thank you so much, Jeremy, and good morning to all of you. I feel real at home here at Education Commission of the States. One of my many jobs in my career, I worked for a state superintendent of education in Indiana and was very active with Education Commission of the States when Ted Sanders was commissioner. And I've always had such high regard for this organization and for its members. They were very active back in my day, and we think a lot of this organization today and really value our partnership with Jeremy, his team, and this organization. So thank you, Jeremy, for including us. It's an honor to be here and to share this time with our partner, the Gallup organization. Strata Education Network is a nonprofit organization headquartered in Indianapolis, Indiana. We have been around for almost 60 years in the area of helping people access and succeed in higher education. For the last 5 years, under the leadership of our CEO, Bill Hansen, we have been focused on what we call completion with a purpose, and that is making closer connections between education and employment. And we do that in a variety of ways. We're a different kind of nonprofit organization. We have a lot of tools available to us to help achieve our mission. We have research and insights, which we're going to be talking about today, our consumer insights work. But we also have, and maybe some of you heard Michelle yesterday, Michelle Reese, who heads our Institute for the Future of Work. So research and insights is one of our tools. We also have philanthropy. We issue grants to organizations that are aligned with our mission and have strategies to address the connection between education and the workforce. We are very active in national engagement with other thought leaders and organizations that share our mission and help advance our mission. We make investments in entrepreneurial organizations that are looking at new ways to offer post-high school education. And we also, and this is the unique part, I think, of our nonprofit organization, we also own and operate affiliate organizations, both private, for-profit, and nonprofit, that also share our mission. And you see them listed here, and I think there may be a couple of folks that are joining us today. I know Inside Track is here, and if I've left one of our other partners out, I'm sorry, but we really value our affiliate organizations who provide solutions to this issue of making a closer connection between education and careers. What we're going to be talking about today is a strategy that we have been involved in now for, I guess, almost 2 years, maybe, Brandon, with our partners at the Gallup organization. In fact, I think this is sort of an anniversary of sorts. It was about a year ago when we issued our first report from our consumer insights work at the National Press Club. And honestly, we didn't even know how it would be perceived. And the basis of this work is what would happen if we employed strategies to improve education by listening to what the consumers of education are telling us. Now, that may seem like a very obvious, maybe, approach, but when you think about it, in other industries, it is very common to apply consumer experience, consumer satisfaction to the improvement of practice and to the improvement of organizations. But we have not employed that strategy to any large degree in education. Think about it for a minute. If you stayed, like I did last night, in a hotel, I checked out this morning, I didn't get 5 feet from the checkout desk before I got an email from the hotel. How was your stay? Give us a rating. If you took an Uber here this morning, you were probably asked to rate your Uber driver. While I was chancellor at Ivy Tech in Indiana, I was also on a hospital board. And I was struck by how at the hospital board meetings we would pore over patient satisfaction surveys. And it really helped us improve how we interacted with patients. It improved our policies and our day-to-day practice across the board. And we just didn't have that mechanism at the college. In fact, I did a very low-tech version of this as I think about it back in the day when I was chancellor. I used to sit in the coffee shop once a week, and it would be open time when any student can sit down and talk with me about anything that was on their minds. And I reflect back on that experience, and those conversations I had with students were so powerful to me as I realized we had issues where I don't think those would have surfaced if I hadn't heard it directly from the consumer. So we've been at this work for about a year now, and we didn't know the power of what would happen when you talk to 350 people every day, all the way from those who didn't finish high school to those who have postgraduate degrees, and ask them about their perceptions, their experiences, their expectations for education. And so the biggest product we have within this consumer insights work is what we call our Education Consumer Survey, where we talk to ordinary Americans every day, 350 of them, and ask a variety of questions about their experiences and their perceptions. And I think Brandon, I don't want to steal your thunder, but Brandon may be asking if any of you have gotten one of those calls. We also work with Gallup on an alumni survey. It started with Purdue probably back in 2013, Brandon? And the president of Purdue, Mitch Daniels, had this notion of, wonder what our alumni think of their experience that they had here at Purdue. Because if you're an alum of a college, like I am, most of you are, when was the last time they called you and asked you, how'd we do? How'd we do with where you are in your career, how you feel about your life, and how did we contribute to that? Normally, if they call me, they want money, or they want me to buy a football season ticket or something like that, but it's not how you doing and how do we do in helping you. So we have the alumni survey. We also started this year a current college student survey, students currently in college, and we're asking them about how well they think they are being prepared for their future by that college. Again, no one's thought to ask those questions before of those consumers. And we're also be releasing soon an employer survey, asking them comparable questions about how they receive new college graduates into the workforce. One of the most controversial topics from this body of work over the last year, particularly among educators, has been the notion of thinking about students as consumers. But they are indeed consumers. They are investing a great deal of their money and time in that service. They have choices. They can make decisions about where to go and what to pursue. And they have expectations about the goods and the services that they are going to be receiving from that experience. So in every way possible, the definition of consumer fits students. So who are the consumers of education? Well, they're the 95 million Americans today without a college experience or credential. And that is the focus of what we're going to be talking about with you all today. They're the 20 million current college students. They're the young adults in the U.S. who are today neither connected to education nor work. And they are current high school graduates, 3.6 million of them, and by the way, declining over the next few years. So today we want to focus on the 95 million adults in the U.S. without any kind of college experience or credential. I would say if I asked for a show of hands, in your states, how many states have either a college attainment goal or have efforts to bring back students who may have started college but didn't finish, or to get students enrolled in college who had never been? I think most states have something like that. And by and large, I'm not talking about your state specifically, but by and large, many states are disappointed in the participation in many of these programs. They are not producing big numbers of college completers or even those who attend. We want to learn more about this population, this 95 million, who we are going to need to get engaged in education to be able to move this country economically forward. So you have in front of you something we're revealing today. This is the first time this body of work has seen the light of day. And so we are very interested in your feedback on it. You are, in a way, one giant big focus group for us today. And we've called it Who's Ready to Upskill? And it's based on questions from the consumer survey that I talked about. The importance of this group cannot be really overstated. They make up the bulk of today's labor force. 65% of the U.S. workforce today does not have a bachelor's degree. So they are the bulk of the workforce. And the question is, how are we going to upskill many of them so that they can take the jobs that are going to be available in our economy? And we've asked them, how motivated are you to go to college, post-high school experience of some sort? And what we found is that nearly half of the U.S. workforce feels that they need additional education to move ahead in their current careers. Some people think this is good news, and some people think it's disappointing news. So it's an opportunity for sure that almost half of U.S. adults feel like they need more education to move ahead in their careers. It's interesting to me that those without a high school diploma are motivated more than those with a high school degree. We also took a look at this by state. And there are differences among the states on what we will call maybe the motivation factor. How motivated is your population to seek additional education? And maybe this could provide some insights to some of the states that are looking at those kind of campaigns to either get people into college by free college tuition, reduced college tuition, all sorts of strategies that we are all dealing with to try to engage this population. And so this starts to help us think about how we might target that population more strategically and where the challenges are. Our insights from this body of work. You can see in the handout there, I think there are many takeaways from this. One is that there is a perceived need. I think it's going to be a challenge in some of our states. I think we can't overlook that not everyone is going to be motivated to a 4-year college degree, that we need to think about certifications and sub-baccalaureate efforts as well. We certainly have a challenge with this in the US, but I think the more insights we have, the more data we have, the more we listen to the consumer, I think the better these strategies will be and the more successful that we will be. So you're going to hear a lot more about this from Brandon Busteed at Gallup, and we welcome your feedback. We are serious that this is one big giant focus group, so I hope you'll let us know your reactions to this body of work, and thank you for what you're doing. I know how hard your jobs are, and we very much appreciate what you're doing to move this population forward. So thank you, Jeremy.
So I can tell you, I've looked at a lot of this research, and my wife and I, with a sophomore in college and 2 children on the way, now do feel like we are consumers. And it does change the perception when you look at what you're trying to get out of an education. I'm really excited to introduce our next speaker, Brandon Busteed, who has been with us at 2 other national forums since I've been in this role. Brandon and I both started in the jobs we have currently in 2012 and have been able to partner on a lot of different events and conferences. And I'm excited to have him kind of share a little bit about what nationally they found at the Gallup organization with these polls, and also potentially some of the problems that they're seeing with what the ratings are showing from that perception. So please join me in welcoming Brandon for the next presentation.
Went in for the handshake, ended up with a hug. That's kind of how we roll, right, Jeremy? By the way, you've all seen this, but I just want to give a shout out to Jeremy, one of the top nonprofits to work for in the United States, ECS. Congratulations on your incredible leadership. Voice of the employees speaking. You know, it turns out, we all know this, right? You've seen the basic needs of human beings. We have very important basic needs related to having our voices heard, it turns out. So if we look at engagement in the workplace, the likelihood that you like your job or even that you rate your life in a great way, one of the most important questions is whether you feel that your opinion counts, that it was heard and that it counts. Obviously, it's very important in a democracy. But I would argue it's so important through the lens of our research that it's a fundamental human need. Here's what's really disappointing. Those of you who might have heard my talk 2 years ago at ECS, one of the stats I mentioned was that K-12 teachers of all professions in the United States are dead last in saying their opinions at work count. Now, I bring those points up because I just want to start with the power of the work that has been done, thanks to Strata Education Network, their incredible vision to unlock the consumer or student voice in this industry. The 100 interviewers at Gallup who have now interviewed more than 250,000 US adults over the last 2 years. And a huge thanks to that 250,000 Americans who took the time to answer the phone and give us their opinion. The best part of it is that I'm going to show you how their opinion counts and matters, because I'm going to share it with all of you, and all of you are in a position to do something about it. So if you don't mind indulging me for a minute, this is being videotaped. I would love for 3 groups to hear you give some applause to them. Strada Education Network, our Gallup interviewers, and the 250,000 Americans who took the time to give us this data. So thank you very much. So now the question is, okay, Brandon, what have all these voices told us? And I'm going to take you into a deep dive across this data, most of which includes the work that we're doing with Strata across the Education Consumer Survey, the Alumni Survey, the Currently Enrolled Student Survey. And if you said, Brandon, what's your high-level summary of what all this information is pointing towards? I'll give you a simple vision, that we need to get closer to having something that looks like a merger of work and school, work and learning. You could say doing and learning. And I'll expand as I dive into the presentation. But that would be my very quick Cliff Notes summary of what this data is telling us. Now we need to start by acknowledging the kind of data that we're collecting now, because you've all heard the expression, we are what we measure. But we don't always measure the things we value. And in fact, we don't always measure the things we value most. And I always throw this example out. We did an analysis of college mission statements, ingested 1,000 of these things. Did one of those cool word cloud analyses, right? That what are the most commonly used phrases in college mission statements? Here's the most commonly used phrase: lifelong learning. And I bring that up because that's a very powerful goal, and indeed is articulated most commonly in the mission statements of institutions across the country. And then I ask you the question, how is anybody measuring whether that is taking place? And you know what? The honest answer is right now, we're not at all. We're certainly not at a systematic level. And by the way, it's not like these things are simple to measure, but you can measure aspects like, you can ask somebody a question. Have you learned or done something interesting in the last day? It's one of the questions we ask in our global world poll. One of the most important questions for your well-being. People who say strongly agree, I learn or do something interesting each day, they have higher well-being than people say, no, not really. By the way, this is an interesting one. There's no difference in the likelihood of strongly agreeing to that question between people who have a college degree and people who don't. Now, I'm not saying that's the end-all, be-all way of measuring lifelong learning, but on a question that kind of gets at an aspect of that, there is no evidence that people who have a college degree are more likely to say they learn or do something interesting each day than people without a college degree. Now, here's one point I want to make very clear. The title of this is, Our Current Measures Are Horribly Insufficient. And I will stand on that all day long. What I also am going to say is that they are completely necessary and important. Okay? So I don't want to be confusing on this point. These indicators that we've been using for decades are very important and will continue to be important indicators of our success and progress for students and teachers and schools and colleges and universities. But if these are the only things that we continue to pay attention to and measure, I would call it horribly insufficient, because if we think about all the things that lead to success in work and in life, there are a whole host of other factors that matter very, very much that we are not paying careful attention to. Now you say, okay, let's first start by getting the premise right. And it doesn't matter what audience we ask this question of, general population, incoming college students, parents of college freshmen, doesn't matter. What's the number one reason why Americans value post-secondary education? By far and away, the top answer is to get a good job. Now, let me be clear. There are many reasons why we value higher education, but if you say, what's the top reason? And the top reason across the board, it's to get a good job. This is another important thing to understand because, see, if you've got someone who gets a diploma, which is essentially the final measure of success for a college or university, degree attainment, but they don't get a good job, or they don't get a job that was aligned with the kind of effort and investment they made and the trajectory they were aiming for, is it a win in that person's column? There's a question mark there. Now, certainly important that they achieved a degree. That is an incredible accomplishment. But see, what they're really going after is they're getting the degree to get a good job, and if you miss the good job marker, that starts to erode the value of that degree in their mind. And we have a lot of evidence to support that notion. So the first premise to get right is that people want a good job more than anything else out of college. And when we start to look at this link between education and work outcomes, we know there's a lot of great economic data out there. So let's start with the positive piece that we know. We know that people who get a college degree, and you've all seen this data, make more money over their lifetime than people who don't. True. But when you start to get under the hood a little bit and ask more qualitative questions, things start to change. And if you say, Brandon, what is America upset about our education system today? And I'm talking about K-12 through higher education. If you just said, what's the thing people are most upset about? It's this. They currently have a vote of no confidence in the work readiness of graduates at all levels. And by the way, we just conducted a poll about 6 weeks ago, and we asked the question about high school graduates. 5% of U.S. adults strongly agree that high school graduates are well prepared for success in the workplace. 3% strongly agree they're well prepared for success in college. I mean, this is insane data. You look across this. 13% of Americans strongly agree that college graduates in the U.S. are well prepared for success in the workplace. Among C-level business executives, in a similar question we've asked, it's 11% who strongly agree. And this is the one that blew my mind. We did a survey of university trustees, national survey with the Association of Governing Boards. These are the folks who sit on the governing boards of these precious institutions of higher education, and they are the most skeptical of any group we've surveyed. 6% strongly agree that colleges have a good understanding of what employers are looking for in a job candidate. It's like, really? There's a lot of skepticism out there. And how much of this is based on perception versus reality? It's a very important point for all of us to understand, because I think it's a potent mix of both. But oh, by the way, when you ask folks inside the academy, they feel pretty good about how they're doing. So this is a survey of chief academic officers of colleges and universities. I know, I don't have to read it for you. I mean, it's like, they're feeling pretty good. What we need to get under the hood with is why. Okay, so the first slide, why is everybody so negative? On the second slide, why are you feeling pretty good about this? I mean, just starting conversations in a very honest and forthcoming way would be a helpful start, but I'll start to give you some of the reality that's in here, right? So part of it is there's some negativity. You read news articles. You have the typical story about a kid who has $150,000 in student loan debt, and they don't have a job, and right, we know those stories. Here's some of the real issues underpinning why the general constituents, the key stakeholders of education, don't feel very good about the work readiness of graduates, and why the academic community actually is feeling okay about it. Let's start with this. This is data that most colleges and universities do not know about their own graduates. The state of the art today in higher education is that they'll send out a survey 6 months post-graduation, and they'll ask a very simple question. Do you have a job? Literally, it's like a question. Do you have a job? Yes or no? It's about as sophisticated as most of these surveys are. And then, or they'll ask, are you enrolled in graduate school? And if you say yes or yes, that's it. That's great, awesome. Nothing about, well, what is that job? Is that a job that aligns with the degree, right? Is that a job that required a bachelor's degree? Is that a job that you feel like you're doing work that you're deeply interested in, that's relevant to what you study, right? There's all kinds of ways we could test this. We asked a really simple question in our national study. We just asked college graduates, and these are recent graduates who graduated in the last 10 years. We asked them about how long it took after graduation before they got a good job. Now, you all know the difference between a good job and a bad job. If I asked you that question, you would know. We've all been in jobs we didn't like. I've been in several I didn't like. We've all been in jobs that we probably like a lot, or in a job we like a lot. We know the difference if somebody asks you the question. Turns out about 27% of college graduates say they had a good job waiting for them upon graduation. About a third of those who were seeking a job, because about 22% of folks in this, something's wrong with my slide, 22% on that far end are those who went to graduate school. So they weren't trying to go into the workforce. But a third of the folks who were looking for a job took 7 months or longer to find one. 16% of college graduates took a year or more. Now, here's the interesting thing. You go, okay, Brandon, how could you double the 27% who had a good job waiting for them upon graduation? I have a very simple answer for you, because it turns out that college graduates who said they had a job or an internship where they applied what they were learning in the classroom, 54% of those graduates had a good job waiting for them upon graduation. So if you just said, what's a magic wand, and it's not this simple, as you all know, what's a magic wand you'd wave over this data to take 27% to 54%? You make sure they have some sort of work experience during college that has some connectivity, some synapse firing between their academic experience and the work that they did. And that could be in the form of a co-op, an internship. I mean, there's a whole bunch of variations of this. Even something as simple as job shadowing. All of these things will help move the needle. Now, here's an interesting one. So one of the questions we asked in the Strada Gallup Education Consumer Survey, we asked them 2 questions about relevance. And one of them is this one: whether or not they think that the coursework they took during college is related to the work that they're currently doing. We asked another question about whether you think the things you learned in college are applicable to your day-to-day life. So we kind of asked it on 2 dimensions. On the work relevance dimension, a quarter strongly agree that the coursework they took is relevant to the job that they're in right now. That, to me, is an alarmingly low percentage, and I'm going to tell you next why it's so important for us to improve how this is happening. Because it turns out that relevance, how a graduate answers that question and the other one I mentioned, relevant to your day-to-day life and relevant to your job, is a much stronger predictor of your feelings that your education was worth the cost and that you had a high-quality education than any objective indicator we can put it against. So it's 2 to 3 times more predictive of your feelings of worth the cost and high quality than any of the classic metrics we've used, including things like average SAT and ACT scores of the students enrolling in the institution, student loan default rates, alumni earnings 10 years later, graduation rates. All of them, by the way, have some predictive relationship with feelings of worth the cost and high quality, but relevance beats all of them by 2 to 3x. So now relevance becomes something really important that we need to know. And guess what? The only way we can find that out, Carol, is to send somebody a survey or to interview them or ask that question, to care to ask that question. Now, the path forward here, no pun intended, requires real work. And in the form of a number of different things. And there's very clear opportunities here. And the first group I'm going to happily throw under the bus today are employers. Here's why. Because you saw the data about how employers feel about the work readiness of college and high school graduates. It's like really low. Then you say, okay, employers, what's the number one thing you want to see from a graduate? And guess what their answer is? This is open-ended, unaided, right? What do you want to see from a graduate? Top response by a mile is a job or an internship experience. And you go, hey, newsflash, schools and colleges don't have those. You do. So I love when I get to speak at Chamber of Commerce events in front of CEOs of organizations, because I'll literally say it exactly as I've said it to all of you today. If the employers across this country, small, medium, and large, of all shapes and sizes, not just for-profit, nonprofit, hey, why not state government? If all employers don't step up in offering more internship opportunities, co-ops, whatever version you want, we're in big trouble. We're never going to be able to move the needle on some of this data if employers don't become part of the ballgame. Now, colleges and universities, school districts certainly can make an effort to reach out to their local employers. Where all the low-hanging fruit is the small and medium-sized employers that no one's thinking about that are within 1 to 5 miles of your campus or your school. Everybody knows about the Fortune 500 company in their area. Great. They've got an internship program. Where you need to go hunting for these opportunities are all the small and medium-sized organizations, right? Think about the architectural firm of 17 employees that wants a marketing intern. The endless opportunities here, but it requires some elbow grease on the part of the schools to reach out, on the part of the employers to really participate, and probably a lot of folks who might help them connect those dots. And we're starting to see a number of organizations that are kind of growing into that space. The more the merrier, in my opinion. Now, here's another interesting point about the connection to employers, because we asked people about the advice they got for college. And we asked them about the helpfulness of that advice. And it turns out the most utilized source of advice is the least helpful according to consumer ratings. And that is formal guidance counseling. Now, this is not me being negative about guidance counseling, because you've all seen the ratio of students to guidance counselors in the United States. We have given guidance counselors an impossible job. I think in some states it's 2,500 to 1. I think national is 400 to 1. How could you possibly advise students on careers when you've got a ratio of 400 or 2,000 to 1? I mean, forget it. So it's not necessarily a critique of guidance counseling, it's a critique of our system. Here's the interesting point. The highest rated source of advice is also the least utilized, and that is informal employer-based sources. So you went to somebody in a job and said, hey, tell me about how you got there. Or you were working with a colleague and said, tell me about, what was your path? Informal sources. So here's an opportunity again for employers. If I want my employees to volunteer somewhere or to spend time doing things, I'd love it if they just spent time talking to students about their career, how they got there, what they think they should major in. So there's huge opportunities for people to step up in so many different ways. But you think about it, the most valued source of advice for college are informal, employer-based sources. What's interesting, too, is that in currently enrolled college students, this career relevance thing actually has a really important relationship with well-being. So if we look at the top driver of well-being among currently enrolled college students, it's a statement about whether they feel they have a chance to do what they're best at each day in school. And we wanted to kind of get under the hood of that. So we're like, okay, what are the drivers of feeling that you have a chance to do what you're best at each day? And it turns out the top two drivers are saying that you feel like the knowledge and skills you're learning are going to be relevant in the workplace. And there's a broader sense that the faculty and staff at my school are committed to helping students find a rewarding career. What are all the ways that happens? We can tell you from our research. They report that somebody at their college talked to them about a career. Like literally, that's the bar. Hey, what are you thinking about doing? That's the bar. Having a conversation. Every staff person, every faculty member at the institution can have that conversation. Now, this is data that originated from our work with the Gallup Purdue Index. It's now part of our collaboration with Strata. It's an ongoing nationally representative study of college graduates. In this particular data, I'm just looking at bachelor degree recipients. But we found 6 really important ingredients of the college experience that double your odds of being engaged in your work over your lifetime. Double your odds of being engaged in your work over your lifetime. And here's what they are. The first 3 I'm going to share with you are what I call having had a relationship-rich experience in college. You strongly agree to questions like, I had at least one professor who made me excited about learning. You strongly agree that the professors, slightly broader question, at my alma mater, cared about me as a person. This is a good one for you. When we do qualitative interviews for graduates who strongly agree to that, and we say, what was it that made you feel your professors cared about you? You know what the most common thing they say is right away at the beginning of the interview? Several of you nailed it. They knew my name. Now, they'll go on, and they'll say things like, and they pushed me, and they made me work hard, and they got to know, But the most common refrain is they knew my name. Another example of the bar is relatively low, folks. Right? Am I right? They knew my name. How can we place value at an organizational level in encouraging everybody to make an effort to know one another's name? That's stuff we can do. And guess what? It doesn't cost any money. Zippo. Nothing. Don't need to build a big building to do that. Don't need fancy new tools. That's part of values. That's part of culture. That's part of human beings just doing things differently and valuing different things within their organization. Now, unfortunately, you can see the percentages of college graduates who strongly agree to these. Only 14% agree to all 3 of these statements in thinking about their undergraduate experience. The most important one on this, of all the 6 that I'm going to give you, is this third one. You strongly agree you had a mentor who encouraged your goals and dreams. Now, a mentor wasn't defined. That could have been a staff person. It could have been an upper-class student. It could have been a faculty member. The most common source of mentoring, by the way, is a faculty member. But they come in all shapes and sizes and forms. and it doesn't matter who your mentor was in terms of the source, like faculty member or upper class student. If you had one, if you say, yep, strongly agree, I had a mentor who encouraged my goals and dreams. That's the biggest game changer of all these items. Only 2 out of 10 college graduates hit the mark on it. Now, the other 3 are what I call work integrated or experiential. And they are things like strongly agreeing that you worked on a long-term project that took a semester or more to complete. Something that sounds a lot like the things we do in work, doesn't it? Most of us work on fairly long-term projects that take some time to come to fruition. You strongly agree, and by the way, we asked a similar question. I want to just make this point very clearly. We asked the question, did you have a paid job during college, yes or no? How many of you had a paid job during college? Raise your hand. Big number. Guess what? That has no relationship with anything later in life. Now, I'm not saying that that wasn't good because you earned money in that job, right? So I'm not saying that. Here's the question that doubles your odds of being engaged in work later. It's a little different. I had a job or internship where I applied what I was learning in the classroom. It's that second part of the phrase that's the game changer. You didn't just have a job, you had one where you applied what you're learning. By the way, this goes on the student end, right? Like, as a student, I need to figure out how I'm drawing connections between the job I'm doing and what I'm studying, so I can take ownership of this. The employer who's providing that opportunity can take ownership of it, and the staff or faculty or program that student's connected to can take ownership of it. I was in a program when I was in college that had a spring semester preparatory course that was linked to a summer internship followed by a fall semester reflection course. Whole year. I couldn't miss the mark on this question if I tried. That was programmatically built in to my major as a public policy major. Now, I could also hit that mark on my own because I had a summer internship that was connected to what I was learning. You get the point. All of us have a role to improve our metrics around these questions. The final one was strongly agreeing that you were extremely involved in an extracurricular activity organization. So we also asked a long list of activities. Were you involved in any of the following, right? Check, check, check. But the one that has the real relationship with workplace engagement later is whether you were extremely, deeply, lastingly, meaningfully engaged in any one of them. And that's a really important thing to think about. See, what we're encouraging students to do right now is pad their resumes. We even have an expression for this. I see somebody coming out of school and they have 17 different extracurricular activities listed on their resume. And the first thing I think about is that that's potentially come at the expense of being deeply, meaningfully engaged in any one of them. There's a big difference there. I don't want to discourage students from exploring things and trying things, but I want to make sure they sink their teeth into something lasting and meaningful. Now, here's what becomes so powerful, because you say, all right, on the far end are the 3% who hit the mark on all 6 of these. Any of you strongly agreed all 6 of these as you were thinking about how you might answer them? Anybody? There's got to be at least a few of you. You're a 3%er. You're a 3%er. Now, that's a really high bar. I don't have the expectation that every college graduate hits the mark on all 6 of these, but wouldn't you think that most of them hit the mark on at least 3 or 4? That seems fair to me. Here's the thing. On the far end, 24% of all college graduates in the United States didn't hit the mark on a single one of these. A quarter. Yet they all met the academic requirements to graduate and receive a diploma. Another 23% hit the mark on just one of them. Which is to say that almost half of all college graduates in the U.S., I'm not even talking about those who started and didn't finish, almost half of all college graduates in the U.S. are a 0 or 1 on this precious 6-question scale that matters so much for work success later. But the likelihood that you strongly agree you were well prepared for life outside of college, isn't that a good question? Gosh, I love that question. Is 17x from one end of the scale to the other. If you hit the mark on all 3, 85% of those graduates strongly agree they were well prepared for life outside of college. You didn't hit the mark on any of them? 5% of those graduates strongly agree they were well prepared for life outside of college. Insane differences. Now, hopefully I've already made the case, and Carol has made the case around the need and importance and value of consumer-based ratings, consumer-based information. And again, when we're saying consumer, we're talking about prospective, current, and former students. And guess what? If you think about that, that's everybody. Prospective, current, and former students. That's how I think about the world. This kind of information helps inform how we're doing and how we can improve. And let me give you some examples about getting the premise right. So back to Carol's data about those who see need for additional education. Based on where they are on previous education level, they have different levels of interest in different types of programs. Okay, so if you're going to start a degree completion program in your state, and basically every state has one, you have to get the premise right because there are very different markets underneath the hood. So people without a high school degree, for example, the thing that they see as most helpful in terms of thinking about their ongoing development is a license to work in a specific field or a GED. Kind of makes sense, right? But for those with no, if you want to market to people, those with no high school diploma, these are the kinds of things that they're going to be most attracted to in terms of their personal motivational interests. Workers with a high school degree feel a bachelor's degree or license to work in a specific field is most helpful. Those with vocational or technical degrees see a license to work in a field or a certification is most helpful. Those with some college no degree say bachelor's degree followed by license or certificate program. And by the way, here's the interesting one. I've seen a lot of well-intentioned state initiatives that are focused primarily on getting people with some college no degree back to college. They are the least likely to say they would go back. They're the hardest nut to crack in getting them to come back. And there's a whole host of things in there, one of which is that to some degree, and we see in our data, they had a lousy experience the first time around. Now, we don't want to be willing to admit that a lousy customer experience is part of the college dropout phenomenon in the United States, but I'm here to tell you it is a factor. And yes, life elements like death of a family member or loss of a job or getting married, all that, right? All that plays into it. So I'm certainly not discounting those things, but the one thing we haven't thought to think about is that a lousy customer experience. It wasn't relevant. I didn't see where it was going, right? I was putting a lot of money into it. I just didn't feel like I was going anywhere with it. I check out, and then you come back to me and say, hey, come on back. You've got a few credits, and you can, no, thanks, man. Already been there, done that. We have to get the premise right so that our campaigns and our strategies work. And just as Carol shared that there's variance by state on people's aptitude and interest in additional education, there's a lot of variance on things like relevance. So this is perceptions of education relevance, in the same kind of chart that Carol shared earlier. And you can see there's variation by state. Here's where it gets even more interesting. We've got so much data now that we can get it down to an institutional level. And we're not revealing these institutions by name, but let me show you California and Texas as two examples. These are the top 5 rated by relevance and the bottom 5 by relevance. And look at the differences. The top rated institution in California happens to be a 4-year private nonprofit, so you can see the 4-year private nonprofits take the top 3 pole positions. But there's a 4-year public in 4th place. You look at the bottom of the list, look at the top to bottom. 60% of graduates strongly agree their coursework was relevant to their job, and the bottom is 8%. This is like a 7-8x differential from the top to bottom performing colleges and universities in a state. And here's Texas. What's interesting here is you'll see the top 3 slots in Texas are won by 4-year public institutions. So here's another thing, right? If you think that private versus public is the big distinguishing element of something like education relevance, no. It's based on what these individual institutions are doing. It turns out there's 3 public institutions in Texas that are crushing on these metrics. And by the way, you'll notice much higher than the top 3 institutions in California. The top institution in Texas is at 81% strongly agreeing. Bottom in Texas, 18%. So if you want to know, is there difference by state? Yeah. Is there difference by institutional level? Yeah. And oh, by the way, we'll also discover soon there's going to be difference by program level within those institutions. So here's a point I want to leave you with. Already, there's a state, Indiana, that has begun incorporating these consumer ratings into their state scorecard. So if you go to the state of Indiana's website, you will see all their data on graduation rates and all those other indicators that are certainly a really important point and part of this process. But you'll also see the ratings of their alumni from those institutions. And it was an amazing story because the state and Strata Education Network and the individual colleges partnered on this initiative. The colleges actually volunteered to survey their own alumni and include that data in the scorecard. Folks, we can do this in every state in the country, do it at a state level and do it at an institutional level, and we are going to make incredible progress if we do. So my hat's off to the work that everybody here is doing, and I hope I have the opportunity to collaborate with all of you at some point in the future. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for the insights that you provided for us there, Brandon. I know, like many of you, I love looking at those kind of tables, but I need some time to digest it also. This is the first time that this information has been released from Gallup, and we're honored to have that here as part of our national forum. So for those of you who have already asked our staff or tweeted, how can I get the slides, we will have them on the app for you later today or tomorrow as one of the resources from this plenary so that you can go through the data in a much more detailed way. Right now, I'd like to ask for Barbara Dameron and Katie Anthus to join me on the stage as I introduce them. And we're excited to have the two of them come with both a post-secondary and a K-12 response to some of the dilemmas that Brandon is outlining from the surveys that they've been doing. Secretary Dameron brings a wealth of experience and knowledge to the stage as she serves as the Secretary of the New Mexico Department of Higher Ed. And Katie Anthus is the Commissioner of Education in the great state of Colorado. And I always like to add, she's also a former ECS staffer. So we have a little bit of affiliation that we enjoy with her. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the issues that we've seen with this polling and where they see that there can be some solutions. So Barbara, why don't you start us off a little bit on some of the concerns that Brandon's outlined about what we're actually getting as far as what an education value is. And are there some areas where you see that states might be able to provide some new projects or policies?
Most definitely. Thank you very much, Jeremy. And again, thank you for a wonderful presentation, great data. First and foremost, the Academy needs to get out of its ivory tower. While the ivory tower, the creation of the Academy had some good aspects to that, the creation of knowledge, advancing science, so much of that which is very important, it's become too much of an extreme with that. And combined with that is the fact that we have 50 experiments going on in our country, where every state is looking at how they're doing higher education in a different way. So we continue to pontificate in higher education about how we should do this. And I draw an example with healthcare, as you did as well, and as a healthcare provider myself. For years in cancer, for example, we were really struggling because mortality rates were very high. When I started my career as an advanced practice cancer nurse, 85% of women with breast cancer died. Over a period of time, what we did, instead of each state looking how they should do that in each hospital, we said, well, we have to come together on this. We have to look at what we can do differently. And for example, the National Institutes of Health decide they're going to fund cooperative groups. Because enough with this deciding, how should we organize, how should we go about this? Let's have some cooperative groups look at this. And with emphasis on many of the same things we're looking at. Prevention. How can we prevent breast cancer? How can we prevent some of the issues we're talking about here? How can we intervene with that? What kind of implementation can we have and how do we evaluate that? Within a period of years, now across the board, 85% of women, counting all stages, with breast cancer live. So that's quite a difference we've made. So in answer to your question, we need to take this information, most definitely, but we need to start coming together aggressively for the good of this country and for good of the world with this. Some states, again, are doing many wonderful things. Indiana, as you talked about, Tennessee, a number of states are exemplars in how they're trying to get towards some of this. But I feel strongly we in the higher education community need to quit pontificating, quit studying our navel, and let's look broadly at how can we do this in a more efficient way.
That's great. Katie, insights from kind of more the K-12 perspective as really this is the future of what we're looking at for post-secondary?
Sure. Yeah, I think one thing I wanted to just address is I think Brandon talked about this a little bit, but or actually maybe it was Michelle yesterday who talked about some of the pushback that they're getting, and I have heard some pushback from K through 12 educators saying, it's not just a career generator. There's a broader sort of goal of education, but I would submit to the K through 12 sort of sector and educators that it's not either or, but it's both and. in this particular element because, I had one constituent who emailed me saying, we're doing too much focus on sort of career prep and we're blurring the lines between K through 12 and work. And I said, it's actually both and. It doesn't mean that you're not preparing students to be good citizens and all of that other stuff, but it connects to what Brandon was saying about relevance. Relevance equals engagement. And if we can have our K through 12 students really engaged in work and see how what they're learning in the K through 12 system can be applied to amazing careers, then they're going to be more engaged. They're going to be more excited to be at school. And all of those other healthy indicators are going to go up. So that was a critical sort of aspect for me.
And Katie, I think there's some areas where we've seen some K-12 school districts themselves starting partnerships for work and career-related programs that are linked in with the traditional elements of what needs to be received for a high school degree.
Yeah, we're doing a lot of that in Colorado. We're focusing on sort of blending and blurring the lines between K through 12, post-secondary, credentials, work. We're really working hard on apprenticeships. We have a full work-based learning continuum in Colorado where we're working with our school districts to say, what does it look like to actually put this into your system? And there's a full continuum to sort of, having some exposure to work opportunities and career opportunities, all the way through to the other end of the continuum, which is a paid apprenticeship, where you're out of the classroom 2 days a week and you're in the classroom 3 days a week and you're applying that learning that you're getting in those work experiences to your learning in school. And we're doing incubators for our districts because it actually takes a lot of work for the K through 12 system to adapt to that type of a learning mode and learning model. And so we have sort of wait lists of districts across the state that want to become involved in this apprenticeship work, but we know that they have some work to do to get ready to have their schedules and their teachers and all of that be able to integrate that.
So Barbara, talk a little bit about how higher ed can help with some of that K-12 continuum there. I know there's some states that are looking at ways of working with school districts and saying, 5 years out, how many of your high school graduates from the 2013 class are still in some post-secondary education or have received a degree or certification?
Well, several aspects with that. And first of all, we know that time is the enemy for the student. And we're still doing things in higher education in many areas as we have been for over 100 years. So we need to look at how we can structure that differently. That also involves, of course, working with K-12. And while we in higher ed can criticize that our students are not ready, I loved how Dr. King yesterday was saying about remediation is another word for high school at college prices. We can talk about how our students aren't ready, but alas, we in higher education are preparing your teachers. So we're part of this vicious cycle. A lot I could say about our colleges, our teacher prep programs, but I'll save that for another commentary. But yes, as we look together how we can pull K-12 and higher ed, we need to kind of blur that line completely. And in many states are doing that. They're looking at what are some of the vocational aspects as well as the professional licensure aspects in the movement towards that. Now, I do caution there's some concern with that. For example, some of the lattice type programs work in a very good way, leading to certain types of credentials. Some do not, and there are some programs out of Department of Labor like SunPath, which many states have with that did some good work looking at for some STEM-H, how some lattice programs can work, starting again both in K-12, moving on to the community college level. But in some cases, that's not the path you want because it goes back to that relevance and such. It can take you down a different path. And as we all know, certain professionals paths bifurcate early on as junior high bifurcation has taken place. If you want to go to medical school, if you want to be certain things, that really starts bifurcating in junior high with that. So states that are really blurring those lines between K-12 and higher ed. In our state of New Mexico, there's a very bright line with that before several of us came into our positions and such, and now working very much so because we see that continuation with that for the students. But again, I come back to that time being the enemy of the student, and we in higher ed need to really become much more flexible, understanding, be part of having stronger prepared teachers who are preparing those students who then get ready for college, but then being flexible with how we can make sure, because I believe strongly those internships, I believe that should be as much of an academic requirement as the coursework is. And in fact, in New Mexico, we've set up an internship portal where I'm busy working on getting every business, let's put your dollars where your mouths are. Let's get those internships going. And if you really want to be part of this and not just complain about what we're putting out with that, you have to have some skin in the game with that and get them to provide paid internships preferably. But that then also means different things like block schedules, different ways of working with students so they don't have these classes 8 to 8:50 Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, but they have these block schedules.
Brandon, you talk a lot about people feeling that their education did not prepare them for their career. But that's a tough situation when you think about the fact that there's many careers that we don't even know about that are going to be right on the cusp in the next 4 or 5 years. I remember a couple of years ago at one of our national forums, Governor Brian Sandoval talked about the real joy he had in Nevada winning the Tesla battery plant. But of the 20,000 some jobs that are going to be associated with that battery plant, 10,000, they didn't know what those jobs were yet. They were building a plant for jobs that they hadn't created. How do we prepare in the system for that kind of change?
Well, there's a couple things I'll pick up on. Katie mentioned stuff about it's not an either or, and you're talking about blurring lines. And I actually think a lot of our problem and challenge starts with the language we use, the definitions we've created, and some of the false dichotomies that we continue to create, right? And I talk about this all the time because it's not just college or career ready. I mean, we all know what that means right now. It's college and career. That's how we've treated it. But college, by the way, why do people want to go to college? Top reason? It leads to that. We're talking about the same things. We created these false dichotomies. Same thing with like the liberal arts or careerism. That's a classic higher ed debate. And you go both and, not either or, right? So a lot of that I think has to do with making sure we're clear around definition languages and things like that. But I think it gets to other fundamental changes that I think are going to be really important in the system. So, but I would start there. I mean, I actually think we've created a big problem with the language we use, and that's preventing a lot of people from thinking about options. And so what's going to happen in terms of workplace volatility, we've already had a high degree of workplace volatility, right? Changing careers, new careers. Decades ago, we made a major shift from, basically people working on farms to industry, right? So like, we've been through this before. There's different threats now, AI, automation, right? But we've been through this before. Here's the interesting thing. The concept, though, of, say, going to college for 4 specific years between the ages of 18 and 22 is entirely antiquated. The idea that you're going to be prepared from 4 magical years for the rest of your life for everything that's going to be thrown at you, I mean, yeah, it's going to help, but like the idea of college is going to be something attached to our hips that we carry with us throughout our lifetime. And it's not just going to be that word college, because that has a very specific connotation in people's minds. It's going to be some form of constant upskilling, reskilling, training, professional development, lifelong learning. We could give it a lot of terms, right? But if we just call it college, we've learned this in our research, that has a distinct meaning for some people. And some people go, no, that's not for me. And right? So, the language becomes a big part. But I'm encouraged by the idea of the blurring of the lines, of the, stretching accreditation, right? There's all kinds of very valuable non-accredited programs in the United States. We aren't doing enough innovation on that front to allow creative new programs to come up. Even like a Miami-Dade College example, very quickly, 2 of their top programs, they have virtually no graduation rates from those programs. They're getting penalized because of this. They're their most popular programs. It's a digital arts program. And the reason why not many students are graduating from it is because they're all getting snatched by recruiters from companies like Pixar before they graduate. And the day I was down there, there was, I can't make this up, a recruiter from Pixar outside the lab, the media lab, and they were like, are you a student in the media lab? I'm like, no, I'm just here visiting. He was looking for somebody from the media lab. All right. The other program was a coding boot camp that they started offering through Miami-Dade. And no one was graduating from that program because they were all getting coding jobs. So it's just simple examples of where we need to really push and stretch ourselves. And accreditation is not just one example, but the blurring, the blending, and language that allows people to see that blurring and blending is going to be really important.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on that a little bit too, just on the more options piece. We're really trying to work hard on that in Colorado. And we actually have, I do want to just highlight that what we've been talking about today are a lot of sort of the traditional post-secondary institutions, but we have huge achievement gaps and attainment gaps and gaps through poverty and race that are not going to these 2-year or 4-year institutions at all. And so we need to think really broadly about closing those gaps. And one of the ways we're thinking about that is through many, many more options. And we have a program in southern Colorado, in Peyton, Colorado, and also want to think about the attainment gaps in rural communities versus urban communities, because the apprenticeships and the internships and all of that stuff it can happen, but it can be more challenging in rural communities. But they have started a certification program for sort of high-tech woodworking in Peyton Widefield in Colorado. And the same thing is happening. So those high school students are in there, they're applying their science, math, their technology into these high-tech, million-dollar sort of woodworking skills, and they are being hired at 6-figure salaries right out of that program, and the recruiters are basically sitting outside that shop too. And the superintendents, the 2 superintendents that came together to do this, you know, they talk about the disengaged students that they had that were dropping out of high school, and that they anecdotally have brought back 20 to 30 of those students because they see the relevance, they see the excitement, they see the pathway. And so those are 20 or 30 students we would have lost in the K through 12 system that are now prepared and ready to go on to a high-paying career.
Now I wanted to jump in, first response to you, but actually I'm going to move to your response and come back to that one. One thing, too, that we're looking at, right, is we're looking at these coding boot camps, and many of our states have these situations where they're getting hired fast they can complete. We still have an obligation to make sure they have some of those essential skills, because just as the agricultural age, the industrial age passed, who knows what's going on. And so we still need to equip those students, and we look at how can we bring some of those essential learning skills, critical thinking, oral and written communication, and some type of quantitative reasoning into all of these pathways, because if we don't, our disadvantaged students, and I know I'm first generation, my parents didn't even go to high school, much less finish high school, and it's through, so education clearly is a path to wonderful things in our country and our world. So all the more reason though why you need to be able to have some of those liberal arts types of things in everything we're talking about. And again, that is the beauty of the academy. It can be done because it's based in that, and it's not this bifurcation we keep talking about. It is the both and. But I also wanted to bring in the aspects, as we're talking about all these different folks being involved with this, are the governing boards. What a potpourri of ineffectiveness are our governing boards. And you can look at both sides of that. The governing boards that are appointed by governors, which have some problems with that, because in some states are actually told, you go in there, you're going to be the enemy of the institution, you know, you're there to really just give it to the institution. But then some of the elected boards are not better themselves, because then they're involved in being elected. Both cases have issues, and as many of you have heard me complain about in New Mexico, I oversee 21 systems in little New Mexico. 2 million people, we have 21 systems plus 10 advisory boards. I have 21 governing boards, 10 advisory boards. We don't have a deep enough bench in New Mexico to have that many competent board of trustee members. I can tell you that right off. So that's problems that we have, and I imagine some of your states are similar to that. Some of you have corrected this problem, but let's be honest. While we're having the governing board, the ones who should be looking at this big picture, how many are there with an agenda that has nothing to do with the very factors that we're talking about here? Some do. I'm not saying they don't. I try very hard to get my hundreds of trustees and regents that I have to get on board with this, but we have to also be aware of that as well. And again, we come back to these 50 experiments. We're looking at 50 experiments and how we fund higher education. We have 50 states with their 15 funding formulas, what outcomes count in the different states. We have 50 states looking at how many boards they should have and that type of thing. So we can't just be looking at the K-12 prep, the faculty, the staff, and the students. We have to look at who's, quote, governing these institutions, and let's have an awakening about what's best for that.
And I think there's a lot of appetite out there among our members and across the states on what is the right kind of governance and how do you apply kind of the pressure that's needed, but also the support to look at some of these changes. Higher ed governance is a very sticky issue. We're working on a paper that we're going to be having out later this year, but even the paper we did earlier this year on K-12 governance, it is dramatically different from state to state on how that works. How do we gain the knowledge of what is working to really create some of these trajectories and career paths for students across some of those governance issues, and especially with the number of changes that we've talked about seeing with new governors, new chiefs, new SHIOs after these elections, is there an opportunity for more states to be partnering in that way? One of the ideas that's been thrown around occasionally, which I enjoy, is looking at how do we get accreditation for some of these learning opportunities that aren't traditional? I mean, the example that I like to use is that we all have a credit score. We know where our credit score is, whether we have a good rating or a bad rating. It's pretty easy. We didn't ask for it. It arrived. We have it. But are there opportunities, and I know the National Student Clearinghouse has looked at some of this, to think, how do you get credit for the learning that is ongoing? How do all of you in attendance potentially get a point or two towards your education credit score because you attended the ECS National Forum? How do we help students get an extra point on their educational attainment because they had an internship that was relevant to the degree they wanted to go towards? And I think that's an important question that's linked to what you're seeing as a problem, Brandon, but what we haven't yet seen as a national opportunity to solve.
Yeah. Well, and I loved Michelle's sort of ideas yesterday around the nano degrees, and that we have to think more about sort of these bite-sized learning opportunities, because I think it does have to be sort of lifelong learning, and we're going to have to find a new way of talking about that and showing that lifelong learning and being motivated to go get those bite-sized learning pathways. And it's not always going to be like going to a 4-year degree, and you know, when you've already done that multiple times, you need more of those bite size. And I also like the term sort of options multiplier, because I also don't want to get into this old dichotomy of you're either college going material or you're not. It's like everything we should be doing, all of those nano degrees or nano learning experiences should be multiplying your options for whatever you want to do. And so, you know, I really want to continue to think about that, how we can do that in Colorado.
But that also goes back to how we're structured in higher education. I mean, the credit itself, you know, again, was based on faculty needs, not on student needs. And so I think in higher, we talk a lot about being student focused. And I said that every decision we make in higher education, in our state of New Mexico, I try every single day to make those decisions through the lens of what's best for that student. But at the end of the day, it's still very much faculty driven. And I was faculty, we're a motley crew. There's lots of challenges with that. And I resisted being a faculty member for a long time, came to being a faculty member later in my career, and I'm glad I waited till later for that. Because it is so insulated and doesn't look at that. That's why you have your CAOs saying, hey, we're knocking it out of the park. You know, the rest of the world going, you dudes are delusional. So that's why we have that disconnect with that aspect. But that comes back to the issues. We look at credit for prior learning. We look at competency-based education. Some states are miles ahead with that and doing it well. Some states are just learning the acronyms and how they can actually apply that. And again, it's working with faculty. Now, I do want to say another word about that, because that is the beauty of our academy. And there is an importance for academic freedom. Without that academic freedom to study, teach what we want, we would be a whole different country. So we really need to protect that. While we're preparing for the workforce and all that, we need to protect that academic freedom. Some of the greatest inventions, some of the greatest knowledge acquisitions that we have, the advancement of science. Again, I keep coming back to science and to cancer, because that basic science, looking at what cells do, that's how we found the most about how we're treating cancer. Now, it wasn't with a targeted focus, I'm going to go study this. It came as the byproduct. So we need to keep that in our institutions, because not all countries have that. There are countries where that is stifled. They're the countries that are begging for our help with healthcare and other work issues and other life issues with that. So we really need to be careful with that. And again, the academy is the perfect place for that when it's done well. But we have to constantly, it's that constant both and that constant blurring of that. How can we keep that creativity, advanced science, and that academic freedom to look at anything we want to, but we do have the obligation to have that student with us prepared for the workforce of today and tomorrow.
Brandon, you talked a lot about business engagement, and I think in the States we hear a lot about coalitions or chambers of commerce that are pushing for X, Y, or Z education policies, but this isn't a discussion around how do we increase internships or how do we increase those opportunities for K-12 and higher ed that you hear as much in states. You have any insights on that?
Well, look, I'm involved in several developing initiatives that are heading in a very exciting direction around employers stepping up, right? But you just take note of the last 2 weeks of news stories that we've heard, and 2 in the last week alone. Amazon partnering with Nova, Community College in Northern Virginia where I live, on a cloud computing program. You saw Google participating with, I think, 23 community colleges on an IT program. And about a week before that, Walmart announced that their employees, for $1 a day, can get access to one of 3 different kinds of programs through 3 different universities that they, I'm sure, negotiated a very big bulk discount on tuition with. But look, that's all happened in the last 2 weeks. Incredibly large employers with great brand names who have done some very innovative work with very innovative institutions of education, right? So I'm encouraged to see that. What I see happening, and I'll give you Gallup's own example because frankly we've been doing this for 40 years. 40% of our global management team right now at Gallup started work at Gallup in either high school or during college. Now, how did that happen? We've had a program for decades of bringing people into our interviewing centers. And about 75% of the people in our interviewing centers are literally current high school students or current college students. They start working at Gallup in a different kind of job. Some stay in those roles, right? Many go into many different places at Gallup. But here's the point. After 40 years of this, almost half of our global management team started work with us before they graduated from college or high school. Now, they're also some of our lifetime employees. These are folks that, I mean, they bleed Gallup. I mean, so that's a model that wasn't, intentional in terms of where I'm going with this, but I do foresee a very immediate future where employers are going to start recruiting students directly out of high school and making education a component of the job. Subtle but revolutionary shift as opposed to going to college and then getting a job. They're going to bring them into the job because they want the top talent, and they're going to make sure that college, in various ways, is part of it. And, that, I think, has a very promising future. Now, that's not going to be for everybody. There's still going to be the students who want to go and have that traditional college campus experience, parents who want their children to have that. Great, that's still going to be alive, right? But I do think we will see a pretty substantial revolution in the notion of employers kind of going downstream, right? Gathering that talent earlier and then growing and developing that talent through many different kinds of professional development, skilling, degree-based kinds of programs. And that's about that merger and the blending that I'm very excited about because higher ed will still have a huge role in that. But the employers are going to be stepping up in different ways.
And I think those are great models that we need to be helping our smaller employers with that. Because the large employers, like I said, many of them are on with that. And as you said, the architectural firm with 17 people, that was a big employer in many of our rural areas. That would be big. So even the small ones, how can we help them as states? What can we help with that? Goodness knows we put out money for all kinds of things way on the back end. But again, looking at prevention, and again, transfer from healthcare to education, this is primary prevention, folks. This is primary prevention. All the healthcare providers are out there, they're still tertiary. Everyone here, we're saving lives every day because the more we help people get education, the healthier they're going to be. So why don't we take some of that state money, help some of those smaller employers with that to be able to get this at least stood up so they can do some of that.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, we're coming towards the end of this session, so are there any closing comments of wisdom that any of the 3 of you want to share?
Lots. No.
Barbara had more to say, I think, about boards and, yeah.
I can
let y'all go
crowdsource it. I told all of my chiefs on my Colorado team they can text me. They can, no, I haven't gotten any texts, but no. I mean, I think in Colorado, we just want to continue to push the envelope on blending, blurring, and having options, having everything be an option multiplier, right? And so I don't think about sort of, education and career and lifelong learning and being a good citizen as one linear path anymore. It's like they're just lattices, and you can go this way and over, and when you get this part, then you can go up here, and then you can go over here, and that's going to have to be just a new way of doing business in our world, because as we've all heard, our economy and our work is changing at the speed of light. And so we're going to have to be able to adapt and be nimble around that. And Colorado does have, with one of our senators and our representatives and members of our state board are here, we're developing a whole new sort of revisioning of education in Colorado called the Education Leadership Council, called the State of Education. And we're going to be incorporating all of these ideas into what does that look like in Colorado, and then how can we all know, whether we're a legislator, a state board member, a commissioner, a higher education officer, how can we all take steps to seeing that vision in the future?
I just want to again go back to this regional aspect in higher education, because you look at your data, look at the mountains, you look at the mountain area, the South Central, the Southeast. I mean, we do have some similarities in our regional areas with that. So first and foremost, I think we could be doing more with that. We have the interstate commissions, congressionally mandated, WICHE, SRAB, MHEC, et cetera. And I think, again, we could look at some of those models from healthcare. We really brought regions together and did work, had cooperative working groups, they were called, and they're really ones making the big strides with Alzheimer's, with cancer, with different work like that. And some of our interstate commissions, I'm a WICHE commissioner as well, are doing a lot of great things regionally, but I think we really need to step back and look at what we can truly do with that, some funding through those mechanisms, how can we come together? Because each state is a snowflake. Each state's its own special snowflake. And while that's neat and that's cool, that gives us diversity and the richness of that, where can we be more efficient with that? How can we bring those together? So I think we should start looking at some regional cooperative, really even some randomized controlled trials in education. Let's move it. That's what's going to move things. Let's do some RCTs. Here's what works, here's what doesn't. Here's how we can blend it. Bam, let's go with it.
I would say we need to build a both-and system, not an either-or system. It's work and learning, not work versus learning. And those are things that I think we can embrace in so many different ways, from our language to our actual practice and policy.
Well, thank you very much. And join me in thanking Katie and Barbara and Brandon for their presentation. Before we convene to go to our breakout sessions, I've got two quick announcements that I'm honored to be a part of. First, I would like to hopefully make most of my staff blush by asking them to please stand and be recognized. This is a team that has put on a lot for our national forum. We've had 6 months of planning for this, and in particular, I know all of you have met and have worked with Antoinette Garcia and Amy Skinner, and I'd like to honor Antoinette, who's over here, and Amy in the back for the work they've done. We also, not like Gallup, but as close as we can get, love to get your feedback. And so you're going to be receiving a lot of survey emails, and we want you to fill those out. We've changed how we do our national forum, how we do our outreach with you, how we connect with you based off those surveys. So please take the time to complete those. You'll be getting some of those tonight, and then you'll be getting others that will be arriving as you on Friday when we close the session. As the president of ECS, I occasionally have the honor to meet some really, really amazing people. I get to travel the country. I've been in all 50 states. I've run in the same pair of running shoes in all 50 states. And I get to meet commissioners who make a big impact, not just in their state, but nationally. And I want to take a quick moment to honor one of our former commissioners who passed away almost a year ago today. Mitchell Chester was a great warrior for students across the country. He was persistent, He had a few critics, and everybody will if you're going to be pushing on some major issues, but he also knew what it took to actually move the needle. He served students in multiple states, in Ohio, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Pennsylvania over the course of his service. I had the honor to be in Boston about 2 months before Mitchell passed away, and we had lunch. And I could tell something was different because Mitchell usually worked at 500 miles an hour. And if I got a 30-minute lunch, I was honored. And we had 2 hours to talk education policy, which was tremendous. I'm really excited to present the President's Award to Angela San George, who is here to receive it on behalf of Mitchell posthumously. We have a video that I'd like to play, and then I would like to have Angela San George, Mitchell's wife, and also Mikhail Chester, his son, to please come up here and receive the award. If we could play the video.
You know, it would be and is quite natural for all of us who are still here, having lost Mitchell, to ask ourselves, what do we do now? He would expect us to carry on.
He would not back down from decisions that he thought were right.
I think what we lost is an individual that, was a steadfast warrior when it came to education reform.
Mitchell Chester had backbone. When he made a decision, it stuck.
His drive was the status quo is not acceptable, and there's a better tomorrow for students in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
He was always very clear that despite whatever politics existed in a community, we were putting kids first, no matter what.
He certainly wanted to make sure that Massachusetts continued on the path of having, high quality standards, even better standards than we had.
He was a tenacious advocate for children.
First of all, I think it's important for Mitchell's children and grandchildren to know he was proud of them. And what an amazing thing for them to know that their father was working as hard as he was and as well as he did on behalf of other kids just like them.
To Mitch's children and to his grandkids, and I'll try and answer this question without getting emotional, I want you to know that your dad and your grandfather was a great man. And I want to thank you for allowing him to be shared with all of us.
Mitchell Chester served as an ECS commissioner for over a decade and served as our steering committee member for the great state of Massachusetts for 7 years. Please join me in welcoming Angela San George and Mikhail Chester to receive the President's Award.
Thank you so much. My heartfelt thanks to Jeremy Anderson, members of the Education Commission of the States, his staff, and all of you who are here today. I also would like to recognize many of Mitchell's close associates and friends who've become very supportive to us over the past year. Dave Driscoll, Paul Toner, Michael Cohen from Achieve, Helene Betancourt, and Maura Banter, who worked with him very closely to help support his cause. And so many of you in the audience for honoring Mitchell with this award. I'd prefer not to be standing here before you today, but wish I could be in the audience applauding as Mitchell came forward to receive this award, share his thanks, comments, and of course, those of you who knew him, his unique humor. Unfortunately, it's not like that. It's been exactly 1 year since Mitch passed. He left us too soon. I know he wanted to do much more as his time permitted. Believe me, it was hard to hold him back. But he understood that to build the world that he wanted for children does not happen all at once, and not in a single lifetime. Young people who in years ahead may not know his name, but they will be touched by his impact in education. We were so lucky to have Mitchell. He was a special person, a teacher, a modest leader, a humble colleague, a kind gentleman, a true friend, and a loving husband and dad. Yet despite this gentle approach, his vision and convictions remained clear, persistent, focused, and strong. His purpose in life was to make the world a better place by providing equity and excellence in education for all students. He called this his North Star. I only hope that we can preserve his memory and celebrate his accomplishments and dreams by continuing his lifetime of work and ambition. I am so very proud to accept this on behalf of my husband, Mitchell. He would have been truly honored and grateful to each of you. Thank you.
Greetings all. It's easy to talk about my dad's commitment to student well-being, institutions of public education, and student success. But in the past year, we've had countless interactions and an outpouring of stories that have given us a sense of the impact that he has had on his field, on you all. And for that, we are very grateful. Thank you for honoring my father with this award.